Hello, good evening, welcome to our front. Tonight, we put the spotlight on the state of the pre-tertiary education sector. This sector has been recently bedeviled by perennial food and funding crisis. We would actually be putting all of that in the right perspective and asking the bigger question about the state of the Ghanaian education, and the most important part being where we are going in the education that we're giving the young people in this country, especially one that is funded by the public purse. After this break. You welcome back. Now, as the dust appears to be settling on the recent food and funding crisis in our senior high schools, we will delve deeper into the underlying causes that appears to be responsible for one of the biggest challenges besetting our pre-tertiary education sector. This comes on the heels of the Education Minister revealing in Ghana's legislature, the Parliament of the Republic of Ghana, that government is indebted to the Food Buffer Stock Company to the tune of some 340 million cedis, which is partly to blame for the current crisis in the senior high schools. So tonight, we will ask whether the feeding crisis is truly over or we have just put a band-aid on it. Now, joining me for this all-important conversation is the man whose responsibility is to be in charge of that pre-tertiary sector, Professor Kwesi Opoku-Amankwah, the Director General of the Ghana Education Service. We'll also be joined by a former Director General, Charles Tochega, in this conversation, and be in Parliament with those who have raised consistent issues about this. The Deputy Ranking will also be my guest. But first, let me start with the man who is currently managing that pre-tertiary sector, the Director General of the Ghana Education Service. Prof, you're welcome to our front. Yes, Prof, you can hear me. You're welcome to our front. Yeah, I sure should be able to get through to Professor Opoku-Amankwah and get to appreciate exactly what's been the problem over the years with this sector. The sector that's likely and most recently being beset with some feeding problems. Professor Opoku-Amankwah, being the Director General of the Ghana Education Service, should be able to join us with some views on this matter. Prof, you can hear me. If you can now hear me, yes, certainly I should be back to speak to him and the other very people that I spoke to you about, the very deputy ranking member on the Education Committee in Parliament, who should really be able to join this conversation too. Also, I did say that at some point in time, he was the biggest man at the GES. Charles Tochega should join the conversation. It is people who understand and appreciate the sector that we should be having this conversation about what's really happening to our pre-tertiary education sector, especially when recently it had perhaps one of those biggest problems. That's to do with feeding, with some schools threatening, including their leadership, to shut down. That problem appears to have been solved, but is that a permanent solution to the crisis, or is just a band-aid for a temporary review and relief, if you want to believe so? What is the permanent solution to what appears to be the biggest problem in that sector? That's the kind of conversation we should be having on our front when we are joined by the Director General of the Ghana Education Service and others, inclusive those who really should be able to clearly deal with this matter in the second. That's what we'll be talking about. So after this break, we will deal with it. You're welcome back to our front. So as I've been trying to get you to appreciate the current problem on the place that we have found perhaps our biggest intervention when it comes to education, that is the senior high schools feeding and funding issues that have been there for a very long time. Tonight, we are putting all of that in proper perspective. We want to understand how to effectively and permanently deal with the problem. We'll be joined in this conversation by the current Director General of the Ghana Education Service. Also joining us is a man who's been in that office before, Charles Tochega, a former Director General of the Ghana Education Service in Parliament. One man who's been championing and demanding answers from government is the Deputy Ranking on the Education Committee, Dr. Clement Abbas-Apak, will also be joining us too. Gentlemen, you're welcome to our front.
Thank you.
Now, let me start with you, Professor Opoku-Amankwah.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Let me start with you, Professor Opoku-Amankwah. Now, run us through first, because we understand now food is being supplied to the schools. Is this the final time we would ever hear of feeding crisis in our senior high school?
Hello.
Yes, Prof.
Yeah,
I can
good
hear you.
evening.
Yes.
I hope I'm online.
Brilliant. I can hear you perfectly, please.
Okay. Good evening, and good evening to my big boss, Mr. Chiga, and then also to Honorable Clement Apak. I hope they all hear me.
Brilliant. They
Yes,
can hear you. Yes. So the question I was asking is this the last time we would ever hear of feeding crisis in our senior high school?
Raymond, as far as we remain human beings and we have issues, I'm not sure there will be any issue about human beings that will be the last time or the first time. There will always be a first time. There will always be continuing periods where we resolve issues. They will keep coming. But what is important is that we should be in a position to identify them early enough. We should be in a position to plan to resolve them as quickly as they come. In spite of plans that we put in, you may have challenges here and there once a while. But when they come up, it should be our responsibility to immediately identify them and respond to them as we have duly done in the case that confronts us now.
Now, as we speak, the schools, virtually every school that had a food crisis, has a problem been solved? Have we gotten out of the woods yet?
Yes, Raymond. I on my side may not call it crisis per se, but there are some food items that we supply to the schools. We work with the buffer stock to supply these food items. There are we've put them into two. We have what we call the perishables, and then we have the non-perishables. For the perishables, we send monies, and the perishables, we are looking at usually the vegetables and the kobis and the contumelies and all that. And what we do is that we send monies to the schools to be able to take care of those things. Then for the non-perishables, that is the grains, the oils, sardines, etc. That one, we work with buffer stock, who also work with various suppliers to supply them. Now, there are 7 of them that we call the 7 critical items, food items: maize, sugar, flour, palm oil, vegetable oil, sardine, and mackerel. These are 7 critical food items that are supplied to the schools. And these were the ones that we heard of shortage in various areas in the various schools within the country. But as we speak now, a two-week special program was put in place, working with buffer stock, working with the minister, working with the Minister of Finance. And as I can boldly tell you that within the 2 weeks that we gave ourselves, we are in the first week now. We are working, and I even have pictures and slides and things that we can show that the food situation now is going down, it's abating. Yeah.
Barely 3 days ago, we're told that schools in the Eastern region and also some even in the Upper West region are still yet to receive food items promised by the Education Ministry. Have they gotten the food items now?
Yes, as I believe when you engaged me for this program, I told you that around this time we're going to have another Zoom with them for them to give us the exact update. But what we know is that for almost every region, some food items have gone. And what we do is that when the food items go, they go to, we've zoned, and we've had special zones within the regions where the food items go. If you take any particular region, you realize that if you take them to maybe the capital town, usually you get the schools traveling longer distances to get to the point. So we are looking at how the schools are distributed within a region. We may have about 3 or 4 points within the region where they will be asked to go and collect the food. But let me also indicate that one of the reasons why we tend to have this periodic challenge is that in the past, when the schools were buying themselves, they arranged in such a way that based on their capacity in terms of storage, maybe they will just take 10 bags today, tomorrow they will take another 10 bags, or next week they will take another 10 bags. And that arrangement still exists with the suppliers. So sometimes you have a situation where the schools may complain that there's no food, not necessarily because no arrangement has been made for food, but their storage is kind of depleting. And if they look at their projections, if the food doesn't come within the next day or two, probably they will have a challenge. They may have contacted their supplier. The supplier may have said that, okay, I'll bring on Wednesday, but the supplier, for one reason or the other, may delay for a day or two. And once you delay for just a day, because the storage that they have is depleting, you may have a challenge with complaints from other places. So that issue is under control. Then the other issue was also about suppliers who were also complaining about their payments. It is not the case that no payment is made, except that we have not been able to pay to catch up. And that one, okay, let me put it this way. That one, usually, it is something that comes up almost all the time, because the releases from the Ministry of Finance, they are done at particular times in the year. They are quarterly releases, while our schools are also run on a daily basis. So when, for this quota, you have released, but the suppliers will still go on to the next quota. So if you release at the end of the quota, in between, suppliers will still go on, and the supplier will still be complaining that I don't have money to supply. So those things are issues that we can always envisage that they may be happening.
Okay.
But these are the things that we need to have a bigger conversation to see how we can resolve them going forward.
Now, as I speak to you, has there been a categorical plan to make sure that at least reduce the periodic and perennial nature of we don't have food in our schools? What has been resolved currently? What has been taken out of the mix that will not make these issues, let's say, repeat the next term?
All right. So going forward into next term, and even this year, this academic year, what the plan is that buffer stock, and as the name implies, theirs is to buy in bulk and then save, so that in times of in lean periods or in times of shortage, we will be able to supply at all times. Especially they will buy during the peak periods, and then they will also buy from the farm houses.
Okay.
Now, to be able to do that effectively, the idea is that they are planned, and then we give them a projected budget for the year. Then based on that, finance will then give them some advances that they can buy in stock and then put it in their warehouses. Then we could then start taking them into the schools, getting suppliers to pick from there, or getting distributors to pick from the source, and then taking them into the schools. We believe that if we can resource them by giving them some advance payment, and then they can use that to buy in advance and store and then also distribute, we will at least lessen the problem of a periodic problem of food shortage in the schools.
Now, the other point, and this is to do with the buffer stock supply, but we owe them some 340 million. Minister was saying that this is partly to blame for the current crisis we have on our hands. If you have not paid them the amount we owe them in times past, How are we assured that this early or advanced releases will go?
I did not listen fully to the minister's presentation yesterday at Parliament, but I believe that he might have informed them that the president has asked that within a given period, those debts should be cleared.
Okay.
And we are very sure that the Ministry of Finance is working to clear those debts. And let me also indicate that as far as debts are concerned, as far as government is concerned, in most cases, government may not be able to pay out debts outright, but what they do is that they pay to catch up. The most important thing is that the suppliers will see that at least they are paid in installments, and we are consistent on the payments in installments. Once they have that, they are very okay to go and supply, and then wait as and when they are paid based on the installment plan that we have with them.
Can you say categorically that at least for this year, there will not be any food shortage again?
Well, we don't know what lies ahead of us, so we can't say categorically. But from the plans that we are putting in place, we hope that there wouldn't be anything of the sort.
Now, there's a question, though, about what the headmasters are saying. They're saying that they are made to sign for what they have not actually received. For example, a supplier will compel a head teacher to sign, say, let's say 10 bags, when he has actually received 5 bags. This is some form of insurance in the system, so that since you don't pay them on time, they can also run effectively. Have you investigated this, or has it come to your attention?
Raymond, the headmasters have said this, and we have heard it from sources, but as we speak now, there's not a single headmaster who has been able to own up and say, I signed for 10 instead of 5, or I signed for 20 instead of 20, So if indeed that is what they've been doing, they should own up for us to know. But they have not owned up. We only hear it. And
Would you investigate?
No headmaster, there's not a single headmaster who has been bold enough to tell us that I signed up for 10, whilst I should have signed up for 2 or 3.
But Prof, I'm sure you have heard the often repeated claim that you are gagging these teachers. That's why they can't speak up. So maybe that's why you're not hearing it.
We are gagging them, so they are doing the wrong thing. Is that the case?
No, you are gagging them, so they can't tell you the truth on the ground.
So you're doing the wrong thing.
No, so you are gagging them, so they can't tell the truth on the ground.
So which is the truth on the ground? The truth on the ground is that they are conniving with the what do you call it, the suppliers to cheat the system. Is that the truth on the ground? And they don't want to tell us, but they would rather go behind us and tell us. And are they telling me that if you come to me and say this is what has happened in my school, because I'm gagging you, you can't come and tell me that?
Are you really
what is
gagging?
The gagging? Is the gagging by talking to me as your Director General, or gagging by going on air? Which one?
Which directive have you given? Have you stopped them from speaking to the media?
Nobody has stopped them from speaking to the media.
How about reporting the reality to you in your office? Have you stopped them from doing so?
They can't be stopped from doing so. Apart from reporting to me, where else would they report to?
That's the problem.
If indeed they want their issues to be resolved, apart from reporting to me, where else can they do that?
This matter to do with the kind of supplies they're asked to report or sign for, are you going to investigate it?
We are investigating. But as I indicated, those who are claiming, they are part of it. So if indeed they are part of it, then we don't even need an investigation. It's just a matter of telling us. If you are able to tell, in fact, when this program started, in the initial stages, we had complaints of this nature. And when they came to our attention, and those who were bold enough to say that supplier A or B came to me and wanted me to do this or that, those suppliers were blacklisted by buffer stock and were taken off the list. So if they are able to tell us, if they are boldly able to tell us that supplier A or B says I should sign for this. And I don't see any gagging in this. You know, I don't see any gagging in this. If you come to the Director General and say, supplier A or B says I should write 20 instead of 10, then the Director General says, why have you come to tell me? So I do what? I punish you for that.
No, I just want to know going forward what will be done about. I was asking whether you can tell the people till the end of the year there won't be any food crisis. You actually have laid out some of the things you are going to do. But before I ask for the final assurance for you, let me hear from some of the people who you work with in this particular sector. Just a moment. The deputy ranking on the Education Committee, Dr. Clement Park, joins us. Dr. Park, you are in Parliament, and you actually were the one who asked the question about what's happening to the very things that's happening in the education front. Are you convinced that the very things the Education Ministry, more important, the GS is putting in place to make sure that we don't have this perennial food shortage happening is proper, prudent, and would achieve the results we want? Well, I guess you are still muted. Doc, if you can unmute, I'll be very glad.
Can you hear me now?
It's brilliant. Let's hear you, sir.
Very well. I was acknowledging my co-panelists and your good self. I think Prof has done his best. I think Prof has done his best to explain an issue that is gargantuan. And the truth must be told. The crust of the matter has to do with the delay in releasing funds by the Ministry of Finance to pay buffer stock food suppliers. As we speak, the minister was in Parliament yesterday to respond to my question regarding how much we owed buffer stock and when buffer stock food suppliers will be paid. He indicated yesterday that we owed some 340 million Ghana cedis. And if you were to look at the complaints that have come up and the letters that different local chapters of CHAS wrote and their resolutions, it was very clear that the reason why they were out was because the buffer stock food suppliers had been hesitant and had refused to supply because they were not getting paid by central government. And so the question I asked and the response that I expected was to hear that government had committed to defray its indebtedness, the 340 million, so as to give space and room for the suppliers to be able to supply food items to the various secondary schools. And you see, this question is important because as a member of Parliament and the deputy ranking member on the Education Committee, I know that the 2022 budget allocated some 2.3 billion Ghana cedis to finance the policy or the program for the year 2022. And so with that amount of money, it beats my imagination as to why we cannot simply defray 340 million Ghana cedis. So ultimately, we would have to call on the finance minister to make those monies available. Because if the money is there, and I know it is there as a member of Parliament, what is preventing the Ministry of Finance from disbursing those monies? And so what Prof is saying clearly, yes, he cannot be certain about what is going to happen going forward. But if what he has narrated can be given effect, and all things being equal, the Finance Ministry will be disbursing these monies according to a laid down criteria at regular intervals with an agreement with the buffer stock and its suppliers. Then I believe we will begin to address the issue so that we can have, some semblance of normalcy to be able to curtail this reoccurring phenomenon where we hear complaints about shortage of food, inadequacy of food, and some of the issues that you have raised. But you see, Raymond, the issue of the food supply chain as far as the secondary school system is concerned, has not helped us. This decision to centralize it, I believe, has created a problem that did not exist.
Okay.
And I say so because it is not just the monies that ought to be paid by government to buffer stock food supplies. The issue of what we call undersupply, we even have oversupply. We have challenges to do with corruption. We know of poor quality and unwholesome food items being supplied. We know of the delays in terms of the timelines of the supplies. And we even have instances of under or oversupply, as you indicated.
Yeah.
And these are matters that...
I guess there's a slight difficulty in reaching Dr.
Many of the headmasters are culture of science. And so these are the issues I've shared. Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly now. But if you can just step back a little bit and backtrack to the point you were talking about undersupply and oversupply issues, perhaps if you pick it up from there, it will be consistent on where we left you or where we lost you.
Very well. Can you hear me now?
Perfect, sir.
Yes. So I was making the point that the issue is not just about central government releasing the money to pay the buffer stock food supplies, but there are other issues where headmasters are unable to speak or to bring forward complaints with regards to the conduct and behavior of some, I would say, unscrupulous suppliers taking advantage of what we call the culture of silence. And I was listing a number of these issues that came up when PIAC did its free senior high school implementation monitoring report 2018-2019. And this was published in December 2019. And they list some of the issues: non-involvement of schools in the selection of suppliers, corruption associated with food supply, poor quality and unwholesomeness of supplies, delay and timelines at supplies. And they also talk about under and oversupply of food items. In fact, Charles itself at his, I believe, 59th annual conference held in Bolgatanga from the 14th to the 21st of November 2021, clearly repeated same issues in their communique, where they talk about buffer stock supplies, offloading, and under supply of various food items. They complain about the buffer stock supplies practice of requesting schools to move to regional capitals to cart the food items to their various institutions.
Okay.
They talk about the performance of the buffer stock company itself, which they think ought to be addressed to avoid poor, unreliable, and erratic supply of food stuff to schools. And so these issues clearly are affecting the smooth operation of these secondary schools by the headmasters, and we need to find a realistic solution to these matters.
I get your point. Now, I'll come back to you, but let me hear from Charles Ayetochega, who's been at the GES before. This is not the first time we've had food shortage issues. In fact, it's been almost perennial, and there appears not to be any permanent solution to this. The current Director General has been outlining what they are doing to fix the problem. To your mind, are these what would, even in the interim, fix what is currently one of the biggest problems in the education sector?
Well, thank you very much. In fact, I am very, very skeptical when it comes to the arrangements that have been put in place. But it's important to go back in history to try and appreciate the problem. But the first question I want to ask here, and honestly, I mean, if we can get some responses, who is actually in charge of the free SHS? Who is? Because seriously, we don't know who is in charge. And as long as we don't know who is in charge, you'll get these kinds of problems. In the past, and in fact historically, if you look at how we manage secondary education over the years, there were two strands from the beginning. You had the northern scholarship holders, and then you had the southern sector. And if you look back seriously, when the difference between that was that the southern schools were paying fees, the northern schools were not paying fees. And you look at the food supplies and the complaints about shortage of food, you will discover that the perennial complaints of food shortage and irregularity in the supply of food came from the northern sector. Why? Because the foundation of the problem was what we have all mentioned, that the Ministry of Finance is not providing the money at the right time. And that was the problem we had when we were managing, we were not even managing, when we were supporting governments to implement the Northern Scholarship, because it all had to do with food. And government was not providing the money at the time that it was needed. So again, it was easier at the southern sector, where the headmasters were fully in control. And the other exciting thing about this was that once the money came in, and the schools received the money from the Scholarship Secretariat, that challenge of supply of food immediately vanished. Now, so certain things become very, very clear. Now, the problem is not about supply of food. The problem is not at all about supply of food. The problem is who is procuring, at what time, and who is delivering. So that is what we need to address. And what we need to address here is it goes down to the fact that it calls to something that Dr. Park was mentioning, some decentralization. Now, the whole centralized system of taking an essential component of the implementation of the free SHS out of the control of the people who are managing the schools is the biggest problem in the whole implementation arrangement. And unless that is resolved, next year you hear the problem. Even though my brother, Prof, has tried to create some comfort for us to say that it may. Well, he even said he was not too sure, and he's right. He's not too sure whether it will not happen again, because under this current arrangement, it will happen. Because as long as the Ministry of Finance is not providing the money, and especially this 314 million that is in debt to the buffer stock, this same problem will come up.
Now,
but the real...
Forgive me, but I wanted to move to Prof. Since your questions were directed at him, and it appears that some of the things you said to you may not be the main issues to deal with. Prof, they are saying until you decentralize and give the money to the people to buy their own food, you rarely would have this matter repeating itself. You agree? Yes, Pastor Opokwa, if you could unmute, yes, I would hear you properly, sir.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Brilliant, I can hear you. The question here is, they are saying the chunk of the problem is the centralized mode of procurement you have put in place. Immediately you decentralize, provide the funds, you will resolve the problem. Is that straightforward?
Raymond, well, it's not that straightforward. Raymond, let me indicate to you, maybe this will be some form of information. As I sit here now, on my desk, I have close to about some 10 to 15 million plus people that we owe in different forms. And out of that, about 60% of that are debts that have turned into what you call judgment debts, running from 2012 down the lane. And they were food supplies that schools purchased. Food supplies that schools purchased. They collected monies from the schools, from the students. They purchased those things and still ended up owing. So merely decentralizing and getting the schools to do that may not necessarily solve the problem.
I want to be clear on what you just told me. Sorry, you said you have 15 million Ghana cedis.
I have between 10 to 15 million Ghana cedis as judgment debt. And out of that, about 60%.
Okay.
of those deaths come from procurements that heads of schools did. And some of them relate to food that they did, they procured, that they were never able to pay off. And that now when you go back to the school, they say the headmaster is gone on pension.
Okay.
And it's part of the debt that GES is supposed to find money to pay. So what I'm saying is that merely decentralizing and getting heads to go and buy the food will not solve the problem. One of the key reasons why we decided that it shouldn't be heads buying the food is that you realize that as far as the school management is concerned, heads spend more time looking for food and the other logistics for the schools rather than concentrating on their major role, which is as instructional leaders. You know, so we felt that this issue about food shouldn't be so much of a challenge to them. And if you all bear me out, we have not come to this point ever since we started the program. You always have challenges of people talking about food here or there. There were even times where the complaints was that we were overfeeding the children.
Interesting.
So this idea, and that is why we brought in buffer stock. Buffer stock, as their name implies, they are supposed to have a buffer. They are supposed to buy, store, and then be able to supply.
Very well.
There are a few challenges in there. That is why we're saying that going forward, once we declare our budget, let's say the whole year, we say out of the whatever the budget of the schools, we're going to have, let's say, 500 million for food. The arrangement is that they could be given some 100 million ahead for them to buy and then stock their warehouses and then be supplying, you know. And then as and when, then the finance ministry will also pay to catch up with their supplies, you know. So it is not wholly the fact that once we decentralize. If we decentralize, what we also need to know is that if we have 700 schools and you decentralize, then you are looking at roughly 700 suppliers. And if we've not paid 700 suppliers, you know what, I mean, once the money comes from the same source, what they will do then is that they will also go ahead and then go and maybe borrow money or go and, loan some food here and there, which will still add up to the cost. You know, so I think what is most important is that we know that as far as government money and government disbursements are concerned, there is no even as what do you call it, as suppliers, you usually not be given the mobilization to go and supply, and then when you come, the difference is paid. You usually will have to do it yourself, and then it comes for payment. And even when the money is there are obviously processes that you go in to access that money, which may take a while. So the delays will come,
okay,
except that, as I indicated, once we draw up a plan, the most important thing is that we follow through the plan to make sure that we do the installments on a consistent basis.
Okay.
So that, yes, we owe you, but instead of maybe owing you 100 cedis, we owe you maybe 10 cedis or 15 cedis. That, I think, will be that it gives you the comfort to be able to continue to supply.
Yeah.
You know, and then there were other issues that were also raised by Honorable Acquah.
Very quickly on those ones, yeah.
Yes, he indicated about the need to involve the schools in selecting suppliers.
Yeah.
In fact, when this whole program started, I quite remember that the buffer stock indicated to the schools that if you have suppliers that are interested in supplying, let them come over and apply to be part of it. And most of the schools, they put up suppliers, the suppliers came, Others also left it for buffer stock to go ahead and work with suppliers for them. Yeah. In the past, the arrangement, not in the past, in fact, the arrangement is that the suppliers are supposed to supply directly to the schools, except that during this period where we have a challenge, that is why we've indicated that if you have maybe one supplier who supplies to 10 schools, and he was going to go to each of the schools, and it's a day each, we are going to have about 10 days for the person to finish. Okay. And we will still have the complaint. So why don't we do some zoning during this period so that the schools can come to the point to come and pick? But as we go forward, we'll revert to the situation where we'll get the suppliers to go directly to the schools.
I get your point. Now, there's a single point about, when the Ministry of Finance issued their frequently asked questions about the IMF program, they said free HSS will not be suspended, but it is being reviewed to make it better. Has this review ended?
Oh, the thing has just been, the suggestion has just come up. So how can the review end? I thought you were going to start to say whether the review has started. No, I think it's a bigger conversation. Mm-hmm. It's a bigger conversation, not only for GES, not only for the Ministry of Education, but for the entire country. And then what we will do is that for us on our part, we will start with the smaller ideas of looking at aspects of it. Today, for example, some of the discussions that I've had with my statistics team for them to do something for me is to do what we call unit cost analysis as far as educating a student is concerned. So we will do unit cost analysis, especially for the free SHS. So if we take Raymond as a student, starting from SHS 1 to SHS 3, we can do the analysis and then come up and say that, to give Raymond quality education, it will cost this much. Within that cost, these are the items in the cost. Then we all put it out there and they'll say, this item, I think we can make do of it, and it will not affect quality. This item, I think we can get parents to pay. This item, let's find some. Let the regional, the district offices or regional offices take care of this. So when we have done that and we've all added our inputs into it, then we can all come back and say that for this, the total cost for educating someone in the free SHS, this is it. But we believe that if you take them item by item, these items, we can do this, we can do that, we can do that. So at the end of the day, we can all agree that this is the amount that we believe that government should bear. So those things are going on, but I believe that once education is not only for GES and Ministry of Education, it will be played into the bigger discussion for all of us to make our contributions.
Thank you so much. Now, let me hear from the two other guests I have on this conversation. Let me start with Mr. Etochega. He says decentralization is not the way to go, but your remarks before we conclude this conversation.
Yeah, I am very confused about this way of looking at how the decision was taken. Now, if you look at what was really existing before the commencement of pre-SHS, students were paying fees. And I'm sure the Auditor General's report has, in majority of cases, particularly in the areas where fees were paid, indicated that schools were unable to collect certain amounts of school fees, but students were fed. Now, I haven't seen the report that Prof. Acquah referred to, but I think that in that same report, they would have mentioned that there were serious arrears in the payment of school fees by students over the period. And in many of the schools where this occurred, the headmaster still went out to look for money to come and feed, hoping that students will pay and they did not pay. And that caused us, even at a point in time, to institute a certain system that said that if you do not pay your fees, you have a right to do your examination, but you will not see your results until you have paid the fee. So we put in those so that we could get some money back from the students in order to reduce the indebtedness to schools caused by the non-payment of fees. Now, all the 50 million that he's referring to is actually in this package, and it is not the headmaster who owns it. At that time, because the headmaster was responsible, he did everything with a certain level of assurance that the students will pay. And the students didn't pay, and this amount was there. The difference between that context and now is that it's unfortunate that Prof is now talking about unit cost per student. I mean, I thought that they had already calculated all of that and knew exactly what the unit cost per student really is. And if you even look at some of the situations happening here, you realize that when it comes to the non-perishables, the schools have never said they don't have supplies until they indicate that government has not provided money for the purchase of the non-perishables. So you can now immediately tell where the challenge is coming from. It's not from the headmasters. It's because the things that they need to do their work are not provided, then they run into all of these kinds of things. But under the free SHS, now that nobody is paying fees, if you do even a per capita arrangement in terms of what previously we used to have as subsidies, it can tell you how much can be paid to each school per capita. And then you can give the money to the headmasters and allow them to go and do what they are going to do. In this case, you will not have the debt of 50 million. And what will also happen is that if a headmaster doesn't really use the money to feed the children and we get all those things, we set our monitoring teams in place and begin to do very specific identification of headmasters who are not performing well, and then we can run the system effectively. But
Mr. Ayetojaga, forgive me, but I need to conclude with Dr. Park because I'm running out of time. Forgive me. Okay. Dr. Park, you've heard the Director General of the Ghana Education Service. Does the future of the Ghana Education Service and education in general look bright?
Well, Raymond, I appreciate the... Oh, no, my phone is gone off.
Well, I guess we may not be able to have the very final, and that's how technology sometimes makes this thing tricky. But if you have any final words, Prof, we will conclude with you. Professor Acquah, if you finally can conclude on this point for us. What, can you unmute?
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, final words for me before I tie the nice ribbons on this show.
Yeah, the final words, quickly let me indicate to your viewers and those also joining us that as of today, as we speak, we have disbursed 103.7 million to the schools in the area of their perishables and then for administrative and then all other charges. So it is not that they have been completely starved of resources. 103.7 million has been disbursed.
Has every school
as I indicate,
received their food?
Received their food.
Yes. Has every school...
I'm talking this 103.7
for perishables.
For perishables. Yes.
But my final question to you is whether every school has received their food.
The food program, as I indicated, is a 2-week food program.
Okay. That
the foods are going into the schools. So have every school received their food? The expectation is that by the end of that 2 weeks, we would have been able to catch up with their supplies, and then we roll out another set of a program to make sure that we don't have any shortage.
What percentage have we done so far?
For us, come again.
What percentage have we done so far?
Percentage of what?
Food supplies to the schools. As it has 60% of all supplies, schools.
You know, the students eat on a daily basis. And as I indicated to you, we don't supply the entire thing to them for the whole period. The schools themselves even don't have storage.
Okay.
Some of them may even take for just a week or for just 2 weeks. You know, so depending on their storage, what is important is that we are able to supply on a consistent basis so that we wouldn't have any challenges of food shortage in the schools.
Thank you so much for joining us on Upfront tonight. And certainly, we can wrap up on this particular point. Thank you so much for joining us, Prof. Many thanks to you also for watching Upfront tonight. We appreciate your very concerns you have sent via the various social media handles to this show. Thank you so much for today's edition.